All right, so I'm Dustin Smith. I am an advisory solution consultant with Nuvolo. Today we're going to talk through Nuvolo's connected workplace and what it can do for either you or your potential customers. So with that being said, this is a super small crowd. Please make this interactive. I want everybody to get the most out of this. As we go through this, I am big on change management. And this is a product demonstration, but as we look at this software, it's important to understand that moving to a new CMMS or an enterprise asset management platform is a big change. And with that, you should really think through what business processes are you willing to change and what are you not willing to change. So just out of curiosity, because this is a super small group, it looks like we've got Crothel, so independent service organization. Do we have anybody from acute facilities here? Okay. Any other types of organizations, or is everybody here from Crothel?
No.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, so one of the things I was going through, and I was trying to do some research before I got into this, and I spent almost 14 years with Intermountain Healthcare, and we had a really, really strong in-house program for imaging that unfortunately got outsourced last February. So right about the same time I left Intermountain, our program went to GE's multimodality service and multi-vendor service, and that was really tough. But as I was going through and kind of preparing for this and thinking about some of the different use cases that are great for imaging, that was a big part of the lens that I looked at this through. And so as we start out, we're on the service portal right now, and what this is this is where the clinicians will go ultimately for help or for information that they need. As I log in, it recognizes who I am, and it has an understanding of what requests that I've put in, and I can start to drill into certain things. So ultimately, I'm not bothering somebody for information that I can get through a self-service portal. So even here, I'm looking at certain reports for areas that I'm over. I can see projected end of life equipment spend. What do I need as far as budget planning, as far as capital budgets, and then also certain PMs and the status of those. But at the end of the day, the main reason why I come in here, odds are I need help. I need either equipment fixed, or the example that I was thinking about last night that I kind of wanted to demonstrate, maybe we've actually got a physicist QC that's just come through. How today, I'm curious how people are tracking these. I know with Intermountain Healthcare, basically we had a service coordination center that would receive these. We'd go through, we'd put them in the system, and then we'd dispatch that out to the engineers. So the way I was thinking about this, there's no reason why we couldn't store this in our system and make it very, very easy to pull from, in addition to having the physical copy if that's the way the radiology department ultimately wants to handle it. So we're going to kind of talk through that process. So here I've got a physicist QC. I'm going to go through and I'm going to put in my tag number. So I can see that this is Mammo. So here I would go through and I would actually attach that physicist report, and I'm going to do that through add attachments. And this will get even more compelling as we go through the system and see some of the outcomes associated with this. So we're call this QC1 pass, and then we're actually going to do it again so that we can see what a failure would look like and why did I do that? Why am I actually putting this in twice? And it's to prove a point. So it's going ahead and submitting this. trying to decide if my internet just died. All right, so we're gonna put it in. And then as I go through and I pull this up again, one thing I want to point out is if I was putting in a regular corrective maintenance request, I've got history, like I can actually see all of these that are put in. All right, the quality check is not on here because I'm only looking at those correctives, but what this does is it prevents you from getting multiple orders, because as we're looking at potentially moving to a new platform, odds are one of the things that drives you to a new platform is you want automation. And with automation, you want assignment rules to be able to drive it down to engineers without you having to do manual scheduling. So with that, you always want clinicians to be able to see the requests that have already gone in. That way you're not sending 2 engineers out for one issue. This is especially important for independent service organizations. You may have field service engineers that are covering a large territory, and if you've got 2 individuals going out for one issue, that's waste. And at the end of the day, you want to eliminate waste. Another benefit to this system and why we talk about the connected workplace, if I needed to send something out to, for instance, facilities, I can actually do that from the exact same catalog. So each of these are simply record producers going out to the appropriate segment. Every single one of these is going to drive very particular action, whether I want an electrician to come out and work on something, or I want an imaging engineer to basically come and perform the remediation activities that came up as part of the physicist report. We've got a single source of truth that enables the clinician to have a consistent experience regardless of the service needed. Alternatively, if I knew where something was, but I didn't have the tag number, I can also create a request from a floor plan. And similarly, I can actually see what corrective work orders are already open on a floor plan and how it's notifying, how it's understanding where I sit. That's associated with my user record. And so it's automatically going to start with the floor I'm on and the location I'm in. It's definitely going to be a little bit more complicated for anybody that's part of a flow pool. Obviously, you're going to have certain clinical staff that does not have an exact location. But with that being said, I can always come up here, and if I'm floating to the second floor at site 3600, I simply type in 3600, my site name, my floor, and now I can actually select a location, and now it's showing me that floor. Similarly, if I wanted to double check and make sure I'm not putting in a duplicate request, it looks like somebody's actually put in a request for this Neptune 3 in an OR. God forbid the person that has to go look at that. The equipment's gross. I don't know if anybody's worked on Neptunes. I wouldn't want to touch one. Okay, so with that, we're going to kind of transition into, we've gone through what it looks like to be a clinician. Now we're going to step into ultimately what it looks like to be an engineer in the system and how can we work through our day. Are there any questions about self-service for clinicians before I move on? Everybody's so quiet. All right, so this is our technician homepage. So from here, I can see what's due, ultimately it's soon, what's open as far as all the shops. I've got what work orders complete by type. Here I can see my 3 different quality checks, and I've also got my PM compliance this week, and then how many hours I've worked this week as well. This is important, especially if there are certain productivity requirements. You want to be able to structure all of these dashboards in a way that rolls up. One of the biggest pain points I had to deal with at Intermountain when I first started, everybody had these different expectations, and we did a poor job aligning them all the way throughout our organization. So a technician knew they were evaluated on PM compliance, but it was never necessarily stated how quickly they need to fill out work orders. And so we had issues with a good portion of our techs and engineers. They wouldn't do any of their actual paperwork until the very end of the month. And then everybody's stressed because nobody understands resource planning. So when we started aligning expectations and creating the appropriate metrics and putting them on a dashboard that was sent out every single morning at those different levels, we started to see change. Because ultimately we understood the expectations, they rolled up, and everybody could effectively manage up. If you weren't able to get your PMs done because you simply could not find the equipment, well, we had a morning huddle at the hospital level every single day. When it came time to actually finish out pumps, when it was pump month, because we had our LVPs in February and our syringe pumps in April, it was insane. We had, I think it was 6,000 PMs kick out in 1 month across the entire organization. How do you manage that workload? You get nurses involved. Make them be the ones actually pulling pumps for you and have a colored sticker so everybody understands what still needs to be done. And that enabled our success because we had transparency and we had the reports that rolled up. So when it came halfway through the month and we wanted to understand where we were at in regards to our PM compliance on pumps, the director knows which sites are not aligning with the technicians and engineers, who's not supporting us. And it made a huge difference. So that, again, I want to talk about not only the system, this is the easy part. Business process and change is the more complicated part that at the end of the day, you ultimately need to decide what am I willing to change and what am I not. Okay, so let's actually go into one of these physicist checks and then we'll talk through why I put 2 in the system. So we've got test 1. And on here, the most important piece that we're gonna see, okay, so I'm gonna move this to work in progress. One of the first things it's gonna do as I click that, I started to have certain fields with an asterisk next to them. That's how I know what's mandatory. Here, I have an asterisk next to schedule. So I need to put in a planned start date. So I'm gonna put in today's date, and I'm going to move this to work in progress by double clicking. This now opens a working, I have the ability to open a working checklist. So as I open this, these are the questions I found this morning that come from the FDA. What it takes for a quality check from a physicist for mammography equipment, all right? And every single one of these questions is directly from that QC. So here I have an opportunity to get all of that documentation that is typically in a spreadsheet, okay? And the reason I have it set up this way is because it's, again, that combination of process and also a solution, potentially. So with this, there are a ton of questions. I think it was 27 different questions, okay? So the real question is simply attaching it to a work order and closing it good enough for a pass? and we only care on a fail, that's an organizational question. That's about the way you want to handle an audit when it comes up. So for the first one, we're simply going to pass it, okay? And this is example number 1, all right? So I go ahead and save this checklist, and now I'm gonna take this work order to completion. So because I didn't do anything, all I'm doing is documenting this against the device. So in the case of an audit, I have that trail. So with that, I need to come to resolution, and we passed QC. Okay, I do not need any labor. And now I have everything filled out. So now I go work complete. Okay, so the next piece of it is we'll go through mobile and we'll talk about, we'll say that I failed the test, and that'll be test number 2 when we actually get over to mobile. So with that being said, what does this look like as far as understanding what happened? Here I have verification data. So if somebody comes back from in for an audit, I can scroll down here and I have every single one of those questions that is normally on that spreadsheet, and I have what the answer was. And so the next time I'm going through an audit, I could, instead of calling it test 1, we could train basically those clinicians to simply put the data in. And then if you ever wanted to go look, in the case of an audit, at the way everything returned, you have access to that information very readily. So now let's go back to our home page and let's actually plan out some work. So here it looks like I've got 19 correctives to do. I've got some distribution requests, got 62 PMs, some recalls, some RPT rounds. We're gonna say we want to work on our PMs. Click preventative maintenance, suddenly it's out and I can see the list of all of the PMs. I wanted to start drilling down even further. We'll say if I wanted to go to the 7th floor of site 3600, I can quickly go through and start show matching. And so now I've got everything on the 7th floor. It looks like this is simply blood warmers and PCUs. Today, I actually want to kind of have a better understanding of what's with my imaging equipment. So if I go back home, I could look at everything that's open as far as our shop. And if I wanted to take a look at what's going on with imaging, maybe I want a better visual representation of who all's assigned to these. So I right click assign to, I can actually create a report on the fly, or I want to look at a visual task board. So now I can see there's some stuff assigned to Dustin, a lot of things assigned to Kyle, clinical tech 3, Aileen, Ben, Abel, and tech 2. And if I wanted to be able to simply reassign some of these, for instance, if I wanted to take this off of Kyle's plate, all I do is just drag it and pull it over to me. And so I've simply reassigned a work order just by moving it from one position to another. It's one of those things, again, though, in the situation where we have our automated assignment rules, hopefully the system's doing this for you. But if there comes a time where maybe somebody's backed up, you could absolutely come in here. And if you're a supervisor or a manager or even an engineer who wants to help out your peers, hop on in, move it over. Okay, so with that, once we have an understanding of ultimately where we're going and what work we're gonna do for the day, we'll actually go ahead and hop over to our mobile application. So as I'm pulling this up, Are there any questions so far?
Is this the standard format for package when we buy it?
So everything that I'm showing today is what we call out of the box. What I will say with that is there is always setup that comes with out of the box, and a lot of things such as assignment rules, that's going to be something that you would set up, but visual task board, the dash, the home pages are one of those things. We give you a phenomenal framework. We have over 200 reports that come out of the box, but I would still say, going back to what I said earlier about aligning expectations, you're going to want to go through and do minor tweaks that ultimately line up with the way you manage things. But everything I show today is going to be out of the box. Great question. Cool. So if I go in here and we actually look at one of our work orders,
This is the mobile app.
this is the mobile application. Yep. So if we think through the way this works in an optimal situation, odds are, because we started out, we've looked at our dashboard, we have an understanding of kind of what the day looks like. Maybe we got a page and we understand where we're going, what location. Well, we go in, we look at the device, and ideally it's tagged. So the vast majority of the time, I'm simply going to click total work orders, that briefcase in the second tile from the right. And once I click this, I'm actually going to click my search bar, and then I'm clicking the vertical columns next to the magnifying glass. And what this does is it opens up my camera. I can go through, I can scan a barcode, and now we have 15 minutes ago, we put in test number 2. Okay, so now I actually have that QC test. And again, depending on the way we want to ultimately structure our work, maybe we're only having them put in those that we failed. So now let's talk through how we're going to manage this. Okay, so again, because we have the exact same audit in our system, the exact same test set up as a checklist, and I know that this is actually broken, all I'm going to do, I'm going to start my work. So I hit that little play timer, and now you can see the ellipses. And I'm going to go through, basically treat this like any other work order. I know plan start is actually a mandatory field. And again, that's out of the box functionality, but you can always turn that off. This is one of those things, a lot of times I will set it up for that to autofill as a system property, because most of our corrective maintenance we're going to start as soon as possible, you know. Okay, and for this, it's simply we go through these tabs, and that's how we're going to get the work done. So on my second tab, this is where my verification details are going to come up, and this is ultimately going to be one of the last things I do, because it's a QC check. So if I move this to work in progress, you'll see these are those exact same questions that we just saw moments ago. All right. And another thing I'll point out is if I fail any of these, it will generate a corrective work order for the tasks failed. And if I fail multiple tasks, they'll all be on one work order. So that's alternatively another way that we could also manage this.
Did you create this checklist, or is this automatic?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
Well, we have to do it ourselves for our devices, right?
Yes, and we're working right now. So we have what we call a hit team, and one of the things that we actually discussed, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, was an environment where people can share their checklists. Where we're kind of struggling with it is, I don't know if that's legal. I think if the OEMs ever catch wind of it, they'd be pretty upset, because we want to put like basically your PM procedures in there. That's our whole goal. And if we allow somebody else to kind of host that information and more or less run the like governance of it, we're never going to be in trouble. But the way I see it, why like every CMMS should ultimately have like those checklists. But the problem with it is it's a ton of data to manage and the legal consequences. Yeah.
Your tasking list here that you created, is it based upon model specific or is it based on that pre-codes or how is it based?
It's up to you because we're not maintaining the data. So this is a checklist associated with a particular work order type. So I created a QC work order type. But for our PMs and our maintenance definitions for those PMs, you can align it based on asset type, model, manufacturer, really any information associated with a particular device. You could even have a separate main PM checklist for a different location. And that's an organizational choice. But to your point, you own the data. So it's how deep do you want to go at the end of the day? I would always go model based and actually have the model specific checklist, because the only alternative to that is you say per OEM, like, did you finish PM per OEM specifications? And then you get away from it.
Like, you know, a good procedure, you don't want to show 41 pages on there, but, you know, the CRM has common readings on it. So if you would sit there and put those readings, but like on the bottom, but, you know, but PM was completed per OEM specs, but you're showing some, that's what most checklists look like from the OEM anyway.
Oh, totally. And so one thing I will say too is we also have the ability to put knowledge articles in here, and a lot of organizations have been maintaining a SharePoint for years to store a lot of their manuals, and so we can always put a hyperlink out there to that particular checklist, and then you have one question that says, did you follow the manual? And in our related knowledge, so if I actually click this, there's 3 horizontal bars. I can put what's called a knowledge article, because I just set up this whole business process this morning. I don't have like a knowledge article associated with this, but this is where I could actually put just that URL. And then the only question becomes, when either Joint Commission or ACR basically comes through and does a walkthrough, you need to have somebody that's responsive enough and actually maintaining that URL, because unfortunately manuals, they do go stale at times.
So we could create an ACR checklist in there too. So like,
absolutely.
We have to attach the work order anyway.
Yeah.
You can't just say I've done the PM. ACR doesn't accept that, like on ultrasounds, you know.
Well, and
all that, so you can build that. You know?
Yeah, and ACR, like what's annoying is you're only going through and doing the PM once a year, but then all of a sudden with ACR, with ACR accreditation, like the OEM may say you only need to touch it once a year, but because it's an ACR accredited facility, you have to do it every 6 months, and you don't want to call it a PM because there may be consequences with calling it a PM. One of those funny areas where our industry it's aggravating, you know, but you can absolutely do that. And we could have it called a different work order type. So you get through the day and you never end up out of compliance simply because of your work order type naming convention, which is crazy, you know? And then as I continue going through here, so here I would be able to associate a knowledge article. If I want to go ahead and put in a part, so I'm going to actually save this record because I've put certain elements on here, and when I add a part, it's actually going out into a secondary. So I'm clicking my vertical ellipses, I'm gonna save it, and then I'll add a cost entry, and my labor is still tracking. Meanwhile, this is just going. So now I add cost entry, and one. And then it's actually going to look for a bin location that I'm pulling this from because it wants to actually maintain my inventory. And then as I save this, it is going to put that in now. And then if I wanted to understand, so I didn't add a cost to that. All right, I don't know if anybody noticed that, but I never once filled out the price. Well, it's okay because as I hit my parts, it's pulling that from my parts master. Because again, this is something that's already in our inventory today and it's pulling it down. So as we go through, we're actually going to close this out. So fixed the concerns with the physicist test. Also worth noting, this is on and offline capable, and it works with both Android and Apple.
When you say offline, you can do this, and then once you get online, it will just update.
Yep, exactly. And where it's more important is you're not going to end up with issues when you lose connection. Okay, so now we can actually go through and we can finish our checklist, and all of this is defaulted in here, so we know we're good. And then the last thing I'm gonna do before I complete this, I'm gonna close my labor entry, and then I'm gonna flip this to close complete. And then I save it. Sorry, my laptop's gonna die, so I gotta plug it in. Are there any questions about closing a work order in mobile?
Do you find that using it on its phone is good? I mean, is the screen big enough?
Yeah, so it's always gonna adapt. A phone works great. The issue with, like, there's not any issues with mobile. The issue is change management. And that's an issue everywhere. As much as mobile is the best route to go, but engineers don't like it. And it's not because it's not more effective. Like you can prove it's more effective. It comes down to change management, and all it takes is one bad experience, and an engineer is not going to use it ever again. Right. And so what I suggest to like organizations as they're going through this process, tell your engineers that they have to use mobile for 30 days. And there's going to be exceptions where it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you're filling out, for instance, you have an OEM come do some work, those work orders don't make a whole lot of sense to do from mobile. You could, like you could absolutely take a picture of the like physical copy of the FSR that they set, and then you could put in really those parts and labor on their behalf. But that certain tasks like that are easier on desktop, in my opinion, and you can even like drag and drop the attachment and simply put it in. But that's the exception, not the rule. I mean, the vast majority of the work we are trying to manage ourselves. And so that piece of it, it always makes sense to go mobile. Any other questions about mobile?
So when you say it's, even if you're offline, you do 3 or 4 work orders, when you get back online, do you have to like download that, or is it automatic? It's automatically once your phone's online, it'll download it.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny you'd ask. I don't think anybody caught it because it was so quick, but I actually lost a connection for like just a moment there. And so what it'll do is the top of the screen where it's blue, that will actually gray out. And then when you reconnect, it will automatically sync that. So I do want to actually show quickly what a knowledge article looks like, just because we had talked about an example. So if I go to that second to last, the horizontal bars, and I scroll down, we do have 2 knowledge articles associated with this. And so if I click one of these, I have access to certain information. You can put this in HTML, and you can have a massive list if you wanted to. Or I think really the best solution right now, you either have that HTML in there or the hyperlink. It all depends on whether or not you already have that information stored, because you don't want to recreate the wheel. If you have an awesome manuals repository, find a way to leverage the system so you can access what you've already built. Is really kind of the way I look at it. Also worth noting, if I wanted to order a part, or I get to a device and I know that I suddenly need a part, I can click this little shopping cart. And then here, going back to that same particular part, I can see what storerooms it's in, and so I can actually place a request. This is really important for any of your mobile engineers, which oftentimes, like your imaging engineers, are floating between locations. And so if they need a part, they may have to request it from someone else. Otherwise, it's trunk stock truck, you know. You could also have it pull from a requisition, start that requisition process if you didn't actually have this in stock as well. Another couple of cool things we have on mobile, we do have a physical inventory application, and that is actually built to be form-fitting for ISOs. And so it's really created so that when you onboard a new client, they can give you a spreadsheet and you simply drop it in the system, and then you cruise around the organization, the serial numbers, and then anything that you found that wasn't in the spreadsheet, it will automatically add that to the inventory. And then it's basically marking those that you have found and adding that to the inventory. And anything that you didn't find, you'd have a discrepancy list. That we're talking about available for in-house programs in the future for them to do kind of physical inventories as well, but it's not made for that use case right now. We also have this concept of rounds, which is the easiest way to think of it. It's going to be, it's a checklist that you associate time with. So certain tasks that you don't need as you would in a work order. If it's super simple and you just need time, then you can use workarounds. Technically, you could use that for the QC checks, and then you're only going to see that information if there's a failure, and it generates that corrective work order. So even there, I don't know if you noticed it, but it had lost my workaround. So I actually selected my cog in the bottom, and I simply connected and disconnected it. And then now I can see my rounds. And so that's an example of what happens when we actually go online and offline. So to see what a particular round looks like, here I've got RPT rounds. Joint Commission was coming down pretty hard on relocatable power taps, and it was a frustrating experience. So I was trying to find a creative way to potentially solve that solution. So here I've got my different locations. If you have tags on the outside of your locations, this is ideally the way you'd use it. Again, super simple. I've simply got start, stop. We can see at the top of the screen. I've got my timer again. I'm starting it. I'm saying how many RPTs we have at the UL level, and that's it. And so all I'm going to do, hit my stop, and then once that's done, all I do is hit the little paper airplane below the play button, and now it's actually submitting that. It'll commit that particular checklist to, in this case, it's a location. If it was a device, that the verification data would be associated with that device as well. And that's, I think it's one of those areas that it can be slick. Again, you're not going to want to use think through the appropriate business process. You don't want to use rounds for everything. I think there's a small subset of use cases that it's not going to run your day-to-day. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to the web-based application. I'm going to now pull up a particular device, and we'll talk about some of the things on an asset record that can be helpful. So we do have a device process. As you go through the device lifecycle, certain things are going to happen. When you put a new device in, it goes through a verification process, and then you'll actually install it. And so as part of the install, it's validating that information is appropriate on the device. And then as part of that disposal workflow, when you dispose of a device, one of the things that is important to know, we do look at whether or not you have the opportunity to say, is PHI data stored? And if so, who's going to destroy that? Are you sending it to somebody? Are you the one that actually put a hole in the hard drive? What are you doing to wipe that out? So another way where we're trying to ensure that you're protected. I mean, let's make sure that everybody's taking the appropriate steps so that we're never out of compliance. We're also leveraging a hierarchy. You had talked about ECRI subtype. We have our asset type, and under that, you're going to have models and then the actual devices. If you want certain information to basically escalate down, risk scoring is one of those. Certain organizations really want to use ECRI subtype to drive their risk scoring. You can absolutely set that up in the system, or you can do your risk scoring at the model level. Owning department, really important. Vendor, on vendor, this is important, especially for those with independent service organizations. Here you'll note I have a customer. When you want to be able to create certain billing activities, customer is ultimately how you're going to drive that. And being able to understand like what areas I'm over, if I'm assigned to certain customers, that's one way we can look at it as well. We have our warranty expiration. Going back to certain automated assignment rules, here I have a supported by and a support group. That's one of the easier ways, the more simplistic ways that oftentimes organizations will drive their automated assignment. Where it gets complicated, well, not complicated, where you need a business process is when you have somebody leave the organization, you need to know that that needs to be switched. And so that's one of the areas where, again, that's business process, not software.
When that's selected, it automatically, the PM is going to generate that person, work orders, everything.
If that's what you desire, yes. And that, for me, based on my experience, that's what we did at Air Mountain. I mean, we had your more intensive equipment, you would have somebody who went through the appropriate training, and those are going to have individuals on the device.
Correct. Image inside, we have specialized people.
Exactly.
It's going to go to them.
Yep. And for the more generalized, your general biomed equipment, maybe you have a floor assigned to an individual, and everything on that floor is going to kick out to this individual unless there's any assets that have the supported by filled out, in which case it's going to escalate to that next level. We have our financial information. So what's our total cost of ownership? What's our useful life? The ability to do downtime tracking. This is one of those things, there is certain levels to this out of the box. downtime tracking is beautiful and immensely complicated. I mean, most of us in this room, we could probably have a debate on hard versus soft downs for 30, 45 minutes. We're still gonna walk out of the room with some disagreements. So this is one of those things that it's likely if you well, there's going to be certain configurations with it to ensure that it works according to the way your organization defines it.
We're having issues with that right now.
With the downtime?
Yeah, that's something I was hoping you would review in this is, because right now my report is like partial and full down. So it's not an accurate number that's going in there. So everything that's documented on that work order is getting pulled into that downtime.
No. Yeah, we'll talk about it afterwards.
Okay, we'll talk about it.
Technical information, this is going to be where this starts to get really relevant is if you're working with a passive monitoring supplier, and that information, especially if you wanted to leverage, we have a cyber solution that we'll go over towards the end of that. Really, your IP and MAC are going to serve as kind of the hooks that allow the two things to communicate. But when you set up Nuvolo, the biggest thing you're setting up is really those workflows, the things that are specific to your organization. And when you have a passive monitoring tool, you may or may not live in it all the time. But really the organizations that are hitting cybersecurity, hitting it hard right now and really creating a business structure that's going to be successful, you have the individuals in IT, and odds are they look at the passive monitoring tool. Okay, and then you have your boots on the ground on the engineering side that are actually putting patches on devices. And then you've got this kind of like black hole where vulnerabilities and security events live, where you have your actual threats. So what our basically tool provides is something to look at for a quarterback that's going to push the information to the appropriate side. And we'll go over that.
This right now too is when you close out the work order, like you close it unless you put that information in there. The only thing that sucks right now is that hasn't crossed over from our old database. So when I tech to closing out work orders right now, they're having to uncheck the PHI on it.
Yeah.
Any network device though, but what's good once everything from our old database is over, they can't close the work order. I would say you need to grab this IP information and put that in there.
Well, and again, like that's the smart way to do it, you know, because it's a pain. You're gonna have pissed off engineers, but at the same time, it's beneficial because by doing that today, you are saving yourself in the future.
That's one of the things to say, why have you the work order?
It's another element. Okay, so now we're gonna hop over to contracts really quick. Here we have a GE contract. We do have the ability to track different levels. So for instance, you may have like a parts only contract under an overarching master services agreement. You've got certain things that maybe it's a better rate, but it still is time and materials. And then you've got the stuff under full service. So we can manage those. And here I have an opportunity to derive the contract cost. This is really important because most of our contracts, you're gonna have your cost at the line item level. And so here are all of my devices that are actually on this contract and then their corresponding cost. And so if I go through, have a good formalized deletion process, like removing something from a contract, then as part of that, I could go in, create that prorated cost, and then my cost of the contract is ultimately going to be updated. And same with our device adds process. The ability to track the realized contract value, because really what this contract coverage is doing system, you set up percentages of, and then so if it's 50% covered or 100%, then it's going to put the corresponding parts and labor cost into this contract, so into this bucket, if you will, and it's saying this is our realized contract value. Now we have an understanding of, is this something that we need to renegotiate, or did we totally hose the contract provider and we're stoked and we don't want to talk to them about it? Where this gets to be more complicated is oftentimes the OEMs or some of our contract providers, they're not actually giving us transparency into what the part would have cost or what the labor would have been. And that again, I think it's a business problem to a large extent. Why are we not able information from the contract providers about what it would have cost? And I think if people can get that language in their contract where they have that theoretical cost, if it was time and materials, then we can truly start actually creating a good realized contract value. Do you guys use the contracts module yet?
Yes,
Oh, okay, nice. And is it helping a lot?
it's definitely better than we had.
Yeah, and everything's about progress at the end of the day, because I think there's, again, my whole talk track, like it's two parts, you know, and it's all iterative. You try something, it works or it doesn't work, and you scale from there. All you're gonna do is grow. It's only gonna get better, but you gotta start somewhere. All right, are there any questions about contracts before I move on to kind of reporting for a little bit, and then we'll hop over to cyber?
We have a what's it called, portal, I guess,
Mhm.
where people can put in their requests that feed into the contracts.
Yeah.
Right now, so we have an MSA,
Mhm.
we have, we use the parent contract thing to be able to have the assets added, but we don't know a way to request asset removals through there. Like, because the field submits those requests to procurement.
Yeah.
We don't know of a way that we can have them request the asset removals or ending.
Okay.
Use the parent contract flow.
Yeah, let's chat afterwards. I think I have a creative solution, but I would want to try it before I announce it to the
Okay.
entire world. Again, iterative. All right. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So now I will go on to just some dashboarding. One of the gentlemen who taught me all the wise things I know about selling software, and I taught him a lot about industry, he told me sexy reports ultimately sell software. So I got to hang out on sexy reports for a little bit. So here we've simply got a productivity report, and then our PMs coming up by location, avoidable damages with costs. What, at the end of the day, what departments do you need to educate? Because there's going to be, you know, certain areas that they use and abuse their equipment. And especially if you are an independent service organization, maybe you need to appropriately modify their contract for those behaviors. And then really, what does our cost tracking for the week look like? What's still unfinished? Overdue PMs. Apparently I'm, you know, the worst tech in the organization. Everything's overdue under my name. What have you closed this week? So really just operations tracking, again, something that in this scenario, we envision really a director kind of looking at this, or a manager, and then you've got that trickle down effect. The technicians are hopefully aligned with this as well. If I talk to somebody about their performance and relativity to this, we don't want them to be surprised. If they are surprised, then we've failed somewhere, because either expectations aren't aligned or we don't have the appropriate reports for people to ultimately be successful. Compliance, this is the boring thing that we all need to talk about, but I hate showcasing it because I don't think it's always a value add. If you're not compliant by Joint Commission standards, you might want to find a new occupation. And then So this is just the historical compliance. One area where there is value talking about, and ultimately you need to have a business process to really think this through, is what did you not touch because it was in use or it was still on a patient? And that's a conversational piece. Financial, we have what's the value we've realized from our contracts? What is our equipment that ultimately needs to be replaced with time? What are our most expensive models? How much did we spend on parts by certain vendors? Anything coming up as our projected end of life equipment spend. Also, we can track end of service. Well, when you can no longer get things repaired. I think end of life is one of the areas that isn't as relevant as we all think it is, because how many devices are you maintaining for 5-10 years after their end of life? It's fairly common.
How are you determining the end of service?
When you get the notification from the OEM, and
I
that
know we can still get parts too on end of service.
it depends.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
that's what you're using there to determine that.
well, and it's your data. Like, so you would put that in for, like, if I think through Intermountain, we had a situation come up with, I think it was the Neptune 2s. The Stryker basically only gave us 6 months, and it was seriously a panic. We didn't have anything like set aside to actually take care of those. And so we had to look into contingency funds, and it was because we weren't servicing those in-house. They were all on full service contracts. And so that was the situation where I would go through and I would mark that end of service so that there was that visibility. This needs immediate attention. Work order itemized cost this quarter by site and department. A better way to look at that in particular is if you're doing some sort of quarterly business reviews for certain customers. This is especially relevant with imaging. General biomed, it's not always as common, but anything with a field service team, I've often seen they would come in and basically select a particular area. So if this was imaging, but I had selected logistics, and it starts honing into what are the work orders associated with that owning department. And you could absolutely set this up for a particular modality if you wanted to. And really, you could set it up for different imaging groups as well. If you wanted to have a regionalized perspective, you could create what we call an assignment group, which is simply a grouping of particular engineers, and then be able to have the appropriate reports. And suddenly you could start benchmarking certain teams against each other. And then with that, we'll go ahead and hop over to cyber for the remainder of our time together. Are there any questions about some of the reporting capabilities?
What about DOA parts? You might already have a dashboard like that, but showing our clients, you don't have that. Something that pulls up the RGA tab.
Yeah.
In the purchase orders, that shows the amount of DOA parts that month that you receive. That's a request that we've been getting from clients, is to stop showing them that information.
What do you have going on tomorrow? Could we, like, okay, let's sit down, because that's something I haven't talked to like any clients about, and I would like to see kind of what you guys are talking about right now. And then if it's something, if there was any way for me to get access to your system, I would like, yeah, let's do it. Okay.
You're gonna totally make calls.
That's how we wanted to come to this class,
That's
so
good.
we could go back and show you their meetings.
What's up?
We send reports to clients.
Mhm.
And I noticed when I report, you don't have the data completed. The data completed.
Yeah, so is this on
It's a
your,
PDF.
the like field service reports you're more or less sending out? Yeah,
That
and
was a request from the client too.
okay, and do you guys know if you're leveraging the kind of, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. you want to see
Yeah.
tomorrow.
So maybe
anybody run these reports, or do you have to have certain?
Yeah, permissions.
Yeah, we have certain ones set up on our system.
So these are probably locked down.
You have all our keys set up there.
And
Okay.
you can always set it up to, you give access to who you want to, is
But there's
the
some that we
benefit of
can
it.
build that are similar to these. Is that how I get access to those signs?
And I would say that the reporting capabilities are, they're slick once you get used to it. It definitely takes a little bit of just, again, trial and error to kind of figure out what you're doing. But once you have that foundational understanding, I feel like it runs fairly smoothly.
I agree. Playing with this thing and getting it to work, once you get everything built the way you want,
Yeah.
it's very valid.
And the dynamic filtering is one of the things that I feel is extremely powerful. Like each technician is going to see the same information, but for them. And the fact that when you have somebody new coming on board, as soon as they're set up in the system, once things start getting assigned to them, they're automatically going to see it. That's huge. Like I remember having to build things in the past from scratch, and it was a nightmare whenever you had any turnover. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and finish up on cyber here. So if we go back to what I had talked about, like ultimately where this sits, kind of right in the center, you've got your passive monitoring solution, and then you have ultimately the CMMS. This sits right in the middle, and this is something that you have an ability to ultimately quarterback from. So what I've got here is ultimately my dashboard, and this is where I start to understand, what do I care about today? And where do I need to start like ultimately driving action? So I have my security events like over the past, what's active, and where I'm actually going to look at action is what's open right now. So if I go through and I look at these, I'm going to look at this first one because I've actually got a particular tag number it's associated with. So I can see this came from my passive monitoring solution scenario. I can see ultimately what it is. If I wanted to go out and actually look at the vulnerability through MITRE, I have access to the hyperlink right here. I can see which devices it mapped to. And then really this is kind of the bread and butter. So if I click through this, this is going to take me all the way into the CMMS proper, we'll call it. And it's all on the same system. So instead of this simply being a tag, now I have, oh, this is an AccuCheck, like this is a Roche device. And how this is all being tied together is ultimately through this MAC address, right? One of the biggest benefits of really leveraging the cybersecurity tool is suddenly we have a way to get our firmware and software revision numbers in there. And I see a lot of benefit in that from like a recall standpoint. I remember responding to recalls in the past and you don't know what software version you're running. So you have to send engineers out to look at all of those devices. If you suddenly have an understanding of which ones are rocking which firmware number, then you only have to respond to a subset of those.
How are these events being pulled? So the system actually goes out once you get the IPs and MAC addresses in there and it scans?
It links up to your passive monitoring supplier. So in order to leverage the cybersecurity tool, you would need a passive monitoring supplier. It's one of those, it's a better together story. And then also device vulnerabilities, we can see ultimately like what's come up over the last little while, which manufacturers seem to have more than others. Are there certain asset types that are having certain issues? What's open as far as our vulnerabilities? And really vulnerabilities are interesting too, because here we need to decide how much risk are we willing to take on? You're not going to take care of every single vulnerability because there's certain risks that we're going to say this is okay, and you simply accept it. And then there's going to be those that we actually need to put into place, certain mitigating controls, whether that you shut down certain ports on a device, like you're working with IT to do something on their side of the fence, or you're patching the device. All of those are different strategies that you can leverage to take care of those vulnerabilities. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to have somebody ultimately looking at this and playing that quarterback role, because we don't know what we're going to do, and we don't know what we're going to say is acceptable risk. And then also we have any of those devices that come into the system that we are not recognizing within the CMMS proper, those are going to create a verification device. So we have an opportunity to say, all right, we need to add this to the system, or this is actually X that sits over here, and then we can map it to that device. So when people turn this on, they may have a flood of new devices that aren't in the system. And what it means is you need to match those together. But as you become more sophisticated, and as the gentleman in those sitting right there, as he's talking about adding that IP and MAC every single time they're going through and touching a device, that's ensuring that we don't have these new devices that pop up when we turn this on. And that's a beneficial activity, regardless of what system you're gonna go to. Start putting your IP and MAC in your system, because at the end of the day, it's going to save you from certain headaches in the future. And that's ultimately going to make your journey that much faster. Yeah.
You have the ability to put in different IP addresses, multiple IP addresses.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. And where it's interesting too, so on any of our devices, we have a network adapter tab, and you can go through and basically say what kind of a network adapter it's utilizing. And if, for instance, if you're utilizing DHCP, do you really want the IP on it? Like, I would argue it's not essential, because it's gonna flip. You know what I mean?
Not if it's reserved.
Okay, okay.
See, all of our stuff is, we got it set up to where we have them reserved.
Yeah.
Networking controls, so in case we do need to do a networking change in our so-called locations or whatnot.
Yeah.
Networking can control that rather than getting in vendors if necessary or whatnot to actually make some changes.
Okay, and are they notifying you if they do make those changes? You're working on it.
We're
Yeah,
working
yeah, yeah.
together a little better with that, but yes.
Yeah, and that's cool. So yeah, you can absolutely go through and add multiples. And then, so that's really the dashboard, and that's kind of the basics of our OT security offering. I think with that,